Hello and welcome back to the Brit Lit Book Club. I'm your host Vanessa, and today we are doing something a little different. We are stepping away from the pages and into the cinema. As promised last week in my episode called Wuthering Heights, everything you need to know before the new movie comes out. I've been to see Wuthering Heights, and boy do I have thoughts. Ever since Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights has arrived, the internet has had a lot of opinions about it, and frankly, so do I. Before we dive in, a quick tea moment, because I refuse to let even a controversial film review go without one. For this episode, I am drinking a delicious blackcurrant tea, and black feels very fitting for this episode. Grab yourself a cup of tea if you can, because we have a lot to talk about. I just spent the week in Monterey with my Classics book club. The weather wasn't great, but we were able to get in a few walks on the beach, several games, lots of food, and of course we saw the new Wuthering Heights in theaters. It was a great week of bonding, and next week I'm interviewing two women who started this special book club that has become such a big part of my life. I can't wait for you to hear from them about starting and running a successful, serious book club. So let's get back to Wuthering Heights. All right, let's set the scene. What kind of film is this? Now, before you listen to this episode, if you haven't read the book or watched the movie, please go back to my last episode and educate yourself on the basics of Wuthering Heights, its plot, themes, and characters. And be sure to hear my disclaimer before watching the movie. The amount of people defending the movie without even reading the book is astounding. And honestly, the amount of people defending the movie without seeing the movie is also astounding. Let me just start with something Emerald Fennell said before the film was released, because I think it's the most important thing to hold on to as you watch. Before she did her research and reread of Wuthering Heights, Fennell sat down and wrote out everything she could remember from the novel. Not what was actually in the book, but what she remembered. What had stayed with her when she first read the novel as a 14-year-old girl. What had lodged in her teenage imagination and never quite left. She has said openly that some of what she wrote down was real and some of it was imagined. And she said that adapting this book in its entirety would be essentially impossible for a single film. You'd need a 10-part miniseries to do it justice. Someday I'm hoping that will come out. So she made a decision. This film is not an adaptation of Wuthering Heights. It's her response to it. I want you to hold that word, response, because once I understood that was the framework, the film started to make a different kind of sense to me. It still has problems, significant ones, but the question shifts. It stops being, did she get the book right, and becomes, what is she actually saying? And what she's saying, at its core, is something genuinely interesting. This film feels like a fever dream. It feels like the memory of a teenage girl who read something overwhelming and romantic and dark and never fully recovered from it. You can feel that in every frame. It's atmospheric in a way that is sometimes stunning and sometimes exhausting, and occasionally both at the same time. Okay, let's talk about what the film gets right. Let me start with what I genuinely appreciated, because there's a real craft here. The moors, the weather, my goodness, the sound design in this film is extraordinary. The wind, the rain, the music, the way landscape almost breathes. I've mentioned my daughter Abby, who just finished studying sound design in film school, and I'm so excited to take her to this movie to get her thoughts on the sound. I actually listened to the soundtrack as I wrote down all my thoughts for this podcast. I felt it was very modern, but also very fitting to the film. Fennell gives us a lot of moor walking, which felt right to me. Emily Brontë walked these moors obsessively. She knew that landscape as intimately as she knew anything. There's something in the physical relentlessness, the need to move across open ground, that captures something true about both Catherine and the book itself. The visual contrast between Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange is beautifully handled. In this film, Thrushcross Grange is almost always bathed in golden light, warm, abundant, sun-soaked. It looks like safety. It looks like what Catherine is supposed to want. And that tension between what looks safe and what feels true is one of the film's most interesting threads. I also genuinely loved what Fennell did with Nellie Dean. In so many adaptations, Nellie is reduced to a functional narrator. She exists to tell us things, possibly unreliably. Here, her perspective is given real weight. The story is filtered through her in a way that reminded me of how important Bronte's choice of narrative frame actually is. Nellie isn't just a witness. She's a woman who has watched this family destroy itself, who has her own complicated loyalties, and who is trying to make sense of something that may not be entirely sensible. Giving that more screen time was one of the film's better instincts. Isabella, too, is unexpectedly funny in the first half of the film. There's an energy to her that I enjoyed, although, and I'll come back to this, what happens to her character by the end is one of my biggest criticisms of the entire film. The costumes deserve a mention. They're not period accurate in the traditional sense. They're what you might call imagined period costumes, shapes that suggest the era without being a museum recreation. And there's something quite deliberate happening with Catherine's silhouette throughout the film. Her clothes make her look physically bigger at Thrushcross Grange, while actually making her feel small. That kind of visual storytelling is Fennell at her best. The passion between Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff and Margot Robbie as Catherine is nearly palpable. Though I do not love the casting in this film, I do think that the chemistry was very good. Let's talk about what the film loses. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you. There's a version of stripping a story down to its emotional core that works. Clueless did it with Emma. The themes of social maneuvering, self-delusion, and eventual self-awareness are all still there, transported into a California high school, but structurally and thematically intact. The same idea with 10 Things I Hate About You and the take on Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. The themes are still there. Nobody was upset about Clueless because Clueless understood what Emma was actually about and found a way to honor it in a completely different context. No one was upset about 10 Things because the overall theme remained. The issue with Fennell's Wuthering Heights is not that she simplified, it's what she chose to simplify away. Hindley, Catherine's brother, is gone. The one whose jealousy and cruelty toward Heathcliff begins the whole cycle, whose grief over his wife's death collapses him into alcoholism, whose son Hareton becomes the next generation's chance at redemption. Gone. In his place, Fennell gives us an abusive father, which is a choice. But that choice erases one of the most important things Brontë built into the story, generational trauma. The way Hindley's treatment of Heathcliff echoes and repeats. The way Hareton mirrors Heathcliff's position, so that Heathcliff can either break the cycle or continue it. The second generation of the novel isn't just plot, it's the entire thesis, and without it, you're left with something that feels like the first half of the book on repeat, which is visually beautiful, but emotionally incomplete. Fennell is not the first person to leave out the last half of Wuthering Heights. In fact, there are more renditions without the last half than with it. And then there's Isabella. In the novel, Isabella is a victim, essentially a sexual assault victim, who realizes how awful Heathcliff is, gets pregnant, and flees to have her baby and live on her own, eventually finding her way out, in an incredible act of bravery, especially for the time period. She escapes Heathcliff, she rebuilds her life, she raises her son away from all of it. She breaks the cycle. That arc is not just satisfying, it's necessary. It shows us that survival is possible, that the cycle can be broken, at least for some people. In Fennell's film, that arc is removed. Isabella becomes, as the film progresses, something closer to a willing participant in her own degradation. And I found that genuinely troubling. Heathcliff keeps Isabella as a pet. The film seems to suggest, just as he himself was once kept, which is an interesting idea, but stripping away her ultimate agency doesn't illuminate that idea. It just leaves her there. And toward the end of the film, Isabella is hauled away, and we're not sure where. There's also a moment, and I can't stop thinking about it, where young Catherine picks up the coins her father has scattered and hands them back to him. It's a small, quiet image, but it carries so much. The economy of power in that household, the way a child learns to appease, the normalization of chaos as a form of love. It's the kind of detail that makes you think Fennell understands exactly what she's doing. And then the film will cut to something that feels like an overextended music video. The sex scene montage, for example, and you're reminded that style and substance are not always in conversation with each other here. Sometimes the style is just having a very good time by itself. Let's talk about Love That Hurts, the film's emotional argument. Despite its unevenness, there's a genuinely important question at the heart of this film, one that Brontë was asking long before we had language for it. Why do we return to the people who hurt us? Catherine was raised inside abusive love, in the book and the movie. It's what she knows. It's what feels like home to her. Heathcliff isn't an aberration in her emotional landscape. He's a continuation of it. When Fennell places that abusive father in the story, I think she's trying to make this legible for a modern audience. She wants to draw the line clearly. This is where it starts. This is the template. And there's something there worth sitting with. The film is asking what women actually want, and it's willing to give an uncomfortable answer. We say we want security and kindness. We do. But many of us have also been conditioned by stories and by experience to mistake emotional chaos for intensity and intensity for love. Before we had language for toxic relationships and red flags, we had stories teaching us how love should feel, and Wuthering Heights was one of the first to do that, and to do it in a profoundly ambiguous way. When Brontë published this book in 1847, readers genuinely didn't know what it was. Was it a romance? A horror story? A tragedy? That confusion wasn't a failure, it was the point. Love in this book is overwhelming, consuming, impossible to contain, and for a very long time, that intensity was mistaken for something aspirational. Over time, we absorbed a kind of rule from stories like this, that love isn't supposed to feel safe or balanced, that it should hurt a little, or a lot, that calm relationships felt empty, like nothing was happening, while the ones filled with tension and jealousy and obsession felt like proof that something was real there, as if suffering was evidence of depth. And so many of us grew up expecting relationships to feel unstable. Longing started to feel more convincing than security. Emotional chaos got confused with chemistry. If something felt peaceful, it was easy to doubt it. But if it kept you anxious and emotionally activated, that felt like love doing its job. You can see it everywhere still. In cinema, the most famous love stories are still the ones that end badly. In music, intensity is framed as honesty, longing and obsession and jealous collapse sung as devotion. The same lesson repeats across every medium. Calm love feels flat, painful love feels profound. The main theme song from Wuthering Heights has been running through my head for days, and you've probably heard it over and over again on social media as well. And I've been thinking about the lyrics as I considered this theme of painful love. Here are the lyrics in case you haven't been listening to the soundtrack on repeat like I have. I'd rather lay down in thorns. I'd rather drown in a stream. I'd rather light myself on fire. I'd rather wear all these scars. I'd rather watch my skin bleed. In the eye of the storm, I can't let go, shattering like glass. Yes, they're breaking up my heart. The chains of love are cruel. I shouldn't feel like a prisoner. My face is turning blue. Can't breathe without you here. The chains of love are cruel. I shouldn't feel like a prisoner. No matter how hard I try, I'm here so permanently. And I wait for your call. I can't let go. I know the chains of love won't break. Oof. And that's exactly why watching Wuthering Heights today feels different than it might have even 20 years ago. You start noticing things that used to pass as romance. You notice how quickly love slides into possession, how permission gets eroded, how someone can be convinced that being chosen, completely, obsessively chosen, is worth any cost. Maybe that's why the story keeps coming back. It still reflects a kind of love we're drawn to, even when we already know where it tends to end. Fennell's film is at its best when it's excavating this. The emotional logic of why Catherine makes the choices she makes is rendered with real empathy here. This isn't a film that judges her, it's a film that asks us to understand her, and for that I give it real credit. Okay, let's talk about adaptation, interpretation, and artistic license. I'm going to get a little deep here. I want to spend a moment on something that's been coming up a lot in the conversation around this film. The question of whether an artist owes fidelity to the source material. My honest answer is no, they don't. Not always, not categorically. Shakespeare took inspiration from historical events, from folk tales, from earlier plays and poems, and he was frequently and deliberately unfaithful to his sources. If every artist drew on existing material, were required to stay faithful to it, nothing genuinely new would ever be created. Interpretation, transformation, and even willful distortion are legitimate tools. Art is allowed to be a conversation with other art without being obligated to reproduce it. Fennell told us clearly what she was doing. She even put quotation marks around Wuthering Heights to emphasize this point. This is her response to the book, her memory of it, her emotional reaction to it as a teenager, given cinematic form. You can feel that. The whole film has a quality of a fever dream, vivid and strange and internally consistent in the way dreams are, even when they don't follow the logic of waking life. So when I criticize this film, I want to be precise about what I'm criticizing. I'm not criticizing Fennell for not making a scene-by-scene adaptation, although I would love to see that someday. I'm criticizing specific choices that I believe betray something essential, not about the plot, but about the themes. And there's a difference, which brings me to the part of this conversation I've been building towards. Let's talk about race, whitewashing, and what cannot be adapted away. Okay, I need to talk about Heathcliff. Almost every major adaptation of Wuthering Heights has whitewashed this character. So Fennell is not doing something new here by casting Jacob Elordi. What she is doing is continuing a long tradition of erasing one of the most significant aspects of Bronte's novel. And in 2026, with everything we know, that continuation is harder to accept. Just when I think we've come a little further as a society, we seem to be taking a step back with this choice. Heathcliff's ambiguous origin is not a background detail. It's not decoration, it is structural to the novel. When Earnshaw brings his dark-skinned, dark-haired child home from Liverpool, which was, in the 1840s, one of the busiest slave ports in the world, Brontë was not being incidental. The way every other character responds to Heathcliff, the hatred, the contempt, and the fear and fascination he provokes, is inseparable from his racial otherness. His being an outsider is not just emotional, it's social and political. His revenge is not just the revenge of a spurned lover. It is the revenge of someone who has been told his entire life that he does not belong, that he is less than, that he can be discarded. When you remove that, you don't just simplify the story, you remove the story's core moral argument. There's a comparison that keeps getting made to Clueless and Emma, and I think it's worth addressing directly. Nobody is upset about Clueless because Clueless kept the themes. It changed the setting, the period, the names, but the social dynamics, the class awareness, and the heroine's blind spots, all of it translated, the core was intact. In Wuthering Heights, removing Heathcliff's racial identity doesn't translate the theme into a new context. It erases it completely. The story of a man who is brutalized because of what he looks like and where he comes from, who then turns that brutality back on the world that shaped him. That is not incidental to Wuthering Heights. It is Wuthering Heights. I've seen a lot of people online rushing to Fennell's defense without having seen the film or read the book. And I understand the impulse. She is a talented filmmaker and a woman working in a difficult male-dominated industry, and reflexive criticism of female directors is real. But defending a creative choice you haven't examined is not the same as defending artistic freedom. What makes Fennell's choice particularly difficult to excuse is that she was so intentional about everything else. The costumes, the cinematography, the narrative framing, none of this is accidental, which means this wasn't accidental either. It was a choice. Artists have the right to ignore elements of their source material, but having the right to do something doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. And removing race from the story in this particular way, and then populating the roles of the story's two most antagonistic characters with actors of color, is not just a missed opportunity. It is, I think, a genuine betrayal of the book's most important work. Okay, let's talk about how two things can exist at the same time. Here's where I land. I love Wuthering Heights, the novel. I love Emily Brontë. I love what she did in that book. The wildness of it, the strangeness of it, the way it refuses to be comfortable or safe or morally tidy. I have genuinely complicated feelings about this film. There are images in it that I keep thinking about. The sound of that wind, Catherine's shape changing as the film progresses, the dead father surrounded by empty bottles, the quiet accumulation of a life shaped by chaos. Fennell is a masterful filmmaker, and there are moments here where that mastery is undeniable. But this film is also a masterclass in style over substance. It stripped away nuances that were not incidental, but essential. It reduced Isabella from a survivor to a spectacle. It erased the generational argument that gives the second half of the novel its hope. And it whitewashed its central character in a way that removes the racial and colonial critique at the very heart of Bronte's vision. These two things, a visually stunning, emotionally resonant fever dream, and a film that fails its source material in some significant ways, can exist at the same time. I don't need to choose, and neither do you. You can love the book and have complicated feelings about the movie. You can appreciate what Fennell was reaching for and still wish she had reached differently. What I will say, without any complication at all, is this. Since the film premiered on the 13th of February, audiobook streams of Wuthering Heights on Spotify have increased by more than 300%. First-time listeners are up by 260%, and Gen Z, ages 13 to 28, has seen a 191% increase in streaming the audiobook. Emily Brontë published Wuthering Heights in 1847, and right now hundreds of thousands of people who have never read it are reading it for the first time. Anytime something sends people back to the classics, genuinely sends them with curiosity and hunger, this is worth celebrating, regardless of the complicated feelings around how we got there. So thank you, Emerald Fennell, for the fever dream. Now, please everyone go read the book, and if you're brave enough, watch the movie. Okay, that's our episode for today. I'd love to know where you land on all of this. Did you see the film? Have you read the book? Or are you one of the new readers who found their way to Emily Brontë through the movie? Come and find me on Instagram at the book club tour and let me know. I've got a question box up in my stories and I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in walking those Yorkshire moors yourself, not in a fever dream, but in real life, with the wind and the rain and the heather and a very good group of fellow book lovers, my British book club tour does include Yorkshire, and there are only 2 spots available for my July tour. You can find all the details at the link in my show notes. Until next time, keep reading, stay curious.